Hello and welcome to the launch of our fall collection. I'm Jill Taylor, and this is my colleague Daniel Goodenough. We're founders of the HuPerson project. So as we launch our first conversation in the collection, what is change in this new world? We've heard many people referring to our times as a time of unprecedented change. So what are those changes and how will we attune to them? So Daniel, as we look at unprecedented change and we examine it, what are some of the first things we need to say about that?
Well, it turns out that many of the things we called unprecedented aren't actually unprecedented. There were times when articles were written and leaders were talking about how our children's mind are being corrupted by phenomena in our culture. And one of the first examples might have been that our children's minds were being corrupted by listening to too many hours of radio. And there were articles in the newspaper of the time.
Yeah.
And then there was too many hours of watching television. And then there was a report of a senator throwing a pinball machine into the river because kids were playing too many hours of pinball and it was corrupting their minds. That moved to video games, social media, and our smart devices. And we find in a recent conversation of our time where even leaders of technology were saying they were restricting their children's time on their smart devices, saying the same things about that. So we might say that what we're calling unprecedented really is what might be unprecedented is more the degree to which it's disrupting our time, disrupting our culture. And so it's the degree of disruption that's unprecedented rather than the changes themselves.
It seems like when we label it as it's unprecedented or we're not present to the degree of disruption versus just a blanket statement about it, that it brings forward a certain mood of helplessness that accompanies what we label unprecedented. And it seems to me that it starts to mean it's out of our hands, or that we have less resources or less ability or skill to deal with it. And so part of, I think, the question I have is, what would it mean to have a different way of relating to what's new? Because we find ourselves in the middle of accelerated exponential change. Is there something, as we look at that and we look at how do we relate to this in new ways, that would help us understand a little bit more of how do we do that?
Well, I think one of the phenomena of this accelerated change that might be being reflected by our forms of entertainment, perhaps, is that whether it's in literature or in film, there's this thing called in media res. And that's in itself is not new. What's new is the degree to which we find ourselves so often entering a movie in media res, which means as we enter the movie, we might enter the movie with a chase scene already in progress, and we're not present to why they're being chased, what they're being chased for, what they're being chased means, what that has to do with the point of the movie. We just enter the movie and we find ourselves already in the middle of a chase scene, which then reflects that in our time as major punctuations of change are coming closer and closer together, and they're cascading together, in which we could say we have cascading exponential change. It can feel like we already find ourselves before we're aware of that change. It's already in progress, like finding ourselves in the middle of that chase scene in the movie. And so I think that's a phenomena of our time.
Yeah. So it sounds like we actually need to cultivate a new mindset to accompany where we find ourselves in this time that we're in. It seems like in this new world, then, we're going to be encountering a lot of unknowns and perhaps unknowable unknowns. And I know there was a book written a while back about black swans. Is there something in what was said about black swans and encountering this cascading change that might be helpful for us to look at together?
Well, as I understand it, that thing that's been coined as black swans was pointing to the phenomena of, for thousands of years in Europe, where before Europe connected to Australia, unlike the interconnected world we live in today, for thousands of years, what was happening in Australia wasn't known about. All swans in Europe were white. And then when we did connect to Australia, we discovered that they have black swans in Australia. So then black swans means all it takes is one example, contrary to what you know, what you your certainty, that all swans are white, that ended that conversation that all swans are white. So then, as we're present in our world too, and what's happening and the exponential change we're in, if we could have a different way of being present to our certainty around our certainty. Then from Black Swan, there was the same author coined what was called gray swans. He was saying that there are things that we couldn't have expected. They were completely unexpected. They were unknown unknowns, and we might not have been able to presence them. However, if we had a different way of engaging our world, where we took it as a given that we should be expecting the unexpected, there would be phenomena that wouldn't catch us so unaware that he is calling it's now a gray swan. So that vigilance to, that presence to what could be unexpected turns a black swan into a gray swan. And when we're factoring this same thing around climate change, this is now becoming, instead of a black swan climate experience, we might say we could have a green swan experience in that we expected the unexpected, weren't caught so unprepared, and are more prepared. So a black swan could then become gray swans and green swans.
Yeah, that's great. We are the HuPerson Project. This is the WYRK work to be done. Come join us. Let's have a conversation.